Stewart. Mr Kerr.
Presiding Officer, it is a pleasure to follow Colin Beattie, who I think gave a considered and thoughtful speech highlighting many of the issues of concern about the bill that I wish to reiterate. This proposed legislation is a bill with good intentions. Of that there is no doubt, and I'm sure it will have a unanimous support across the chamber when we get to decision time this evening. But it is severely lacking in detail. What exactly are we to scrutinise today in this stage 1 debate? The idea that we ought to take a view about modernising our law in relation to how we treat people who are suffering severe mental health issues in relation to their financial affairs. Surely we would all agree with that, but surely also when we've got a bill in front of us, we should be looking more to the substance of what's being proposed to deal with the issue. Now, Murdo Fraser has said that we on these benches will support the bill. As I say, I think it will be unanimously, I hope, supported. But we need more detail. News laws cannot just be made casually. We don't have a great reputation in this Parliament for making solid and robust law. We don't have a revising chamber. We have got to get to the detail of any bill so that we don't produce bad or weak law. We should be very, very wary of rubber stamping such vague bills as the bill that's in front of us this afternoon. For example, who is to be helped? How are they to be helped? How long are they to be helped for? What mechanisms will be used to provide the help? We've no idea about what additional resources will be required in a public sense or indeed in a private sense to be able to fulfil the requirements of the bill, because they just don't exist as specific, substantial details. So we are all left to discuss today in a worthy principle. Like I say, everyone in the chamber already agrees on it, namely that we should update our existing bankruptcy legislation, introduce some mental health moratorium for people suffering from mental health issues. But I just don't think that we should accept any provisions that emerge on the basis of this bill that leave at-risk Scots in a less protected position than people in England and Wales. I'm afraid, I hope none of us would support a bill or the details of any bill that would leave our citizens in a worse off position than their fellows in the rest of the United Kingdom. And that's what I fear we will see happen if the Scottish Government, as is its pattern, accepts the recommendations of its own working group, specifically in terms of the entry criteria, well covered, and I congratulate the convener and the committee for the excellent Stage 1 report they produced. That's well covered in paragraph 50 of their report, as is, and in paragraph 72, the scope of the protections. And the request of the Economy and Fair Work Committee in paragraph 76, if the Minister wants to look it up, I think the Minister should agree to that today. He should agree today to commit to the request of the committee. And the reason I have to ask this is because there's nothing in the bill which spells out the detail that we are all badly missing. So Section 1 of this bill gives ministers, and I quote, power by regulations to establish a moratorium on debt recovery action in relation to individuals who have a mental illness. But the policy memorandum produced by the Minister goes even further, produces it more succinctly. Further work, this is the quote, further work will be taken forward within government and with stakeholders to develop the details of the scheme, which will cover specific areas such as the criteria for entry to and exit from a moratorium, the specific protections afforded by a moratorium and the duration of those protections. So the substance of the bill is still to be worked out. And therefore our role as parliamentarians in scrutinising what the government is proposing is largely fatuous. But I have to say this is a familiar trick from the SNP and Scottish Greens in office. They bring forward framework legislation which empowers ministers, and I think Daniel Johnson's right to highlight his concerns, which we should all share about the extent of those powers. Sounded very like Henry VIII powers to me as he read that section of the bill. But they bring forward framework legislation empowering ministers to... Yes, of course.
Alistair Allen. Could we please have Dr Allen's microphone? Or could... We still...
I listened to what the member is saying. My apologies. about framework legislation. He does kind of present it as if this is a uniquely Scottish phenomenon. I mean, would he not acknowledge that framework legislation is a feature of legislation in Westminster as well?
Stephen Kerr.
I'm not presenting it as anything of the sort. I mean, I don't like framework legislation, whoever produces it. I just happen to think that the government party, that Alistair Allen's a member of, produces more of this stuff than is palatable, frankly, in a parliament where we should be scrutinising the substance of detail. And empowering ministers all the time to introduce the detail of secondary legislation. But we all know this parliament can barely cope with the secondary legislation it already has. More and more secondary legislation with a completely inadequate means of scrutinising. It couldn't be called robust, the way that we deal with secondary legislation. I'm happy to give way to Keith Brown.
Keith Brown.
Can I thank Stephen Kerr for giving way? Just given the contempt which he's repeatedly shown in his speech for the ability of this Parliament to legislate, and the unjustifiable faith he has in the Westminster system to graduate, and his description of this fatuous nature, how can he possibly be considering voting for this today?
Stephen Kerr.
I don't know if Keith Brown is listening at all. I didn't mention anything about Westminster. I didn't hold up Westminster in terms. In fact, I said the opposite. I said very clearly to Alistair Allen, I don't like framework legislation, whoever produces it, because frankly, I think the whole point of government is to be of this Parliament is to be a counterweight to the executive. Exactly. We shouldn't be trusting in ministers to produce detail in secondary legislation when no Parliament, Keith Brown, has the capacity to properly scrutinise secondary legislation. Happy to give way.
Minister?
I just want to clarify. Mr Kerr, in his remarks, has been keen to stress the importance of parity with the position within the rest of the UK. The scheme that he speaks of so favourably was made under regulations, under provisions similar to a framework bill. So I'm not really unsure what the particular issue is that he's trying to address, particularly given when, in receiving evidence, the position that the government has set out of determining this through regulations was supported by citizens' advice.
Stephen Kerr.
Well, once again, I have no idea. I'm delighted to hear how the SNP hold Westminster up as somehow the standard against everything we do in this Parliament has to be measured. My goodness me, this is a breakthrough moment for the Union. That the SNP set their stall out on the basis of what happens in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And, of course, the former leader of the SNP at Westminster is desperate to get in the House of Lords. Maybe that's because he also has such a high feeling, has esteem for Westminster. Well, the fact is that secondary legislation is an inadequate way of bringing forward these sorts of measures. They should, as Fergus Ewing rightly says,
taken. I've been very generous. Please bring your remarks to close within the next 30 seconds. Thank you very much.
I will close in the next 30 seconds. Let me just. There were lots more to be said about secondary legislation, but I respect the fact I don't have the time. So let me just conclude by saying why I'm voting for the bill. I think Keith Brown might be interested to listen to this, and the reason I do it is because there are some worthy things in the bill. In an ever-changing society, the imperative of dynamic legal frameworks is self-evident, and it's incumbent upon us as legislators to ensure our legislative framework adapts to continue to provide
Mr. Kerr,
fair and efficient
I think the 30
solutions.
seconds have passed, but thank you very much. I think we get the general.
Hardship.
Just thank you, Mr. Kerr.
Thank you very much,
thank you, Mr.
Deputy.
Kerr. I now call Kevin